that was there that day, and then the entire district attorney's office was there for us. And when everything was all settled and the trial was over, we had the access to all of the services that were provided. I mean, I was given a list of here are the people that you can call, and we can actually call them and they would answer the phone and we could set up an appointment. Being a state legislator now and hearing the stories from others, that's not afforded to everybody else, and it is so disappointing and disheartening for me to find out that you had to have been involved in the largest mass shooting in our state's history to get the services that is required to help you through things. And so that's why I'm working down it, because that's what I've heard the last 6+ years is, oh, it wasn't this, it was mental health. It was this kind of a concern. Well, now I'm working on something with that, and we'll work as vigorously with that approach as I have to make sure that we keep the firearms out of those who, have deemed themselves to be dangerous. We'll also then need to make sure that people who are looking for the help can get the help, and that we have the services provided for them.
Absolutely.
I think part of that difference is that there's a difference between a mental crisis and mental illness. And that's one of the differentiations, that at times in my life I felt that I was in mental crisis because of this trauma. But that doesn't define me as mentally ill. And I think that that's part of the struggle with the healing process, is people feel labeled. If you have a trauma, like you break your toe, you don't go the rest of your life having broken toe disease, right? So going through a trauma doesn't mean that you are forever mentally ill. It just means that you need mental health care.
One of the things we experienced after Chloe's murder was the ripple effect that it had, particularly on the young people in the school. There were thousands of people that were affected. We received thousands of letters, and we know dozens and dozens of kids that really struggled afterward. The teachers struggled. The school district struggled. The school district is still struggling. It changed the culture of the school district, they've tried to put in programs since then, resiliency programs and support programs for the kids. But kids were afraid to go to school. They're still afraid to go to school, and I think that's happening perhaps across the country, where it used to not be that way. And adults need to support the kids, young people that are put in these situations, and they're fearful. And programs that support mental health, not only for the survivors, but the kids, the perpetrators. The boy that killed our daughter, the boys that killed the victims and the students at Columbine, they were suffering a mental illness. Their anger and hatred had gotten to the point of a mental illness. And we need programs to identify that and prevent that, as well as to support the people that have suffered through it.
Absolutely.
Well, Gov, I'm going to have to run to another meeting, but I do want to thank you for convening this conversation, because I think you're absolutely right. There is a ripple effect when there is mass shootings. And a lot of times, like, the parents are the focus, but then there's the community that's impacted as well. The students and the recent suicides that you've mentioned out of the school in Florida and Sandy Hook is something that has to be addressed, because the people that we don't see are still struggling with the trauma of what they've witnessed. And a lot of times they're invisible, and it's hard to reach them. And you hear after facts, well, they were still struggling with the survivor's guilt. But I don't know if people really know how to ask for help sometimes, because the focus seems to be on the parents or on the students, the people that were right there, and then there's this ripple effect that's out there that we don't even know who they are and how they were impacted. And then they end up taking their own lives because they're suffering, I believe, in silence.
Right.
And so I think it's so very important to have that conversation, because it has to move beyond just the parent, just the person you see in front. It's also the sister. It's also the community. It's also the neighbors. when these tragedies that happen, it impacts all of us in all different levels.
No, and that's the real point of why the federal government should be able to step forward in this is they should have the moral compass, but B, the resources and the experts, the talent to really go forward and reach out to people so people don't have to come forward, right? And in some level of safety,
Right.
they can discuss what they're going through, and because again, there are so many different responses to this kind of trauma. And the federal government, I mean, obviously we've got to have universal background checks sometime in this
Yes.
country. Nationally, we've got to get red flag laws. There's a lot of other legislation that our leaders are going to
Yes.
help us
Work
get through.
on it. We'll get back to work on it.
But I think this is something that we haven't really addressed and taken advantage of. I mean, we are so farther along, just your description of 20 years, how much further along we are now. I'm not sure we're utilizing that life experience like we should.
I agree, and I think that part of the struggle, so I worked in the state mental hospital here in Colorado for quite a while, and in 2011, they closed down most of Fort Logan.
That's right.
And that was heart-wrenching because we no longer had a children's unit, a geriatric unit, and we just started turning those people to the jail systems. And I think that Colorado has a lot of work to do in the mental health world, offering resources. After the Aurora theater shooting, we had the program created for the crisis centers. We should be able to provide these things without people dying to pay the price.
Absolutely.
I think we're seeing a convergence here a little bit too, because of tragedies like this, and now what we're seeing with our veterans.
Yes.
You know, it didn't happen in the past generation where soldiers were able to talk about what they were going through. And now, you know, there is more discussion about their trauma and how that trauma has to be dealt with.
I agree, and I think that that's where things like EMDR, there's an EMDR therapy, we've learned a lot from veterans and the services that they receive. I think it's great.
Yeah.
And we do need to model that after what we've learned from them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's an overall recognition of what trauma is and what kind of things it does to people.
And removing the stigma that somebody that fights for our country should not feel a stigma surrounding suffering trauma as a result, and being an American citizen impacted by this type of trauma also should not have a stigma around it because we didn't ask for this.
Also, I want to add too that this should not be just looked at as mass shootings. It's the one death, it's the two deaths. Those also are the cases that are traumatizing to people. And what are we doing about it? I've seen some of the people that Daniel knew in high school, and I look at them today, and I know some of them have struggled with things like alcoholism, or I just look and say, you know, I don't think that person is reaching their full potential. Can I say that that's because of what happened to them? No, I can't say for sure, but boy, you really wonder, and you wonder if there could have been something more done. But it's part of that. We have to be able to be willing to talk about it and erase this stigma around seeing somebody. And we also have to face the fact that the resources. I mean, my wife and I at least were able to, we were able to afford that, those payments, counselor, after the fund was no longer going to do that. But think of the people who can't afford that and don't get the help because they feel they can't afford it. I think that's especially the case when it is, a domestic violence shooting or, some other one that's doesn't get the publicity that the others do. I was glad to see the former Attorney General and Frank DeAngelis and some others set up that healing fund. $1 million they had from some fines and setting something up. But boy, that's just scratching the surface. And I think that they were talking about it being mass shootings. We need something, I think broader than that. Because at least in the case of mass shootings, people are willing to give from their heart to that. How much of the healing fund in Columbine went towards mental health? I don't know offhand, but it went into a whole lot of projects. There is a national group. I don't know if you're a part of that. I can't remember if you and Tom are. But there's a national group that.
Every town?
No. It's a less formal group that encourages that whenever there is a mass shooting, the funds that are set up for that should go towards what the victims want.
Anita Bush.
Anita Bush, yes, Anita Bush and her group. And to me, that's especially one place that money should go, but let the victims have some say in that. Instead, what you see happening is somebody sets up a fund, or a number of groups set up funds, and then they decide where the money is going to go.
And it goes to community support projects and not necessarily to support the mental health of the victims or
Yeah.
the people that are affected, not directly identified as victims, but victimized by a trauma. I'd also like to add, I provide services for domestic violence offenders and general mental health care for people involved in the criminal justice system, because the two boys that killed our dad were involved in the diversion program for breaking into a van. And I now work with that program, and one of the biggest treatment barriers is payment. And if they're court ordered to services and they can't pay, guess where they go? Jail. Guess what they don't get? Treatment. So it's this broader conversation about mental health care, providing services, how do we pay for those services, and how do we support people long term? I treat so many people where their trauma was 20, 30 years ago, and victims' compensation only pays for 1 to 2 years of treatment, or it has to go in front of a board. And the reality is some people are so numb after something this significant that they feel okay because they haven't registered what has happened. And so making sure that we can provide services, and I get so many calls every day, hey, I need services, where do I go? There isn't enough for people in the state of Colorado. There aren't enough providers of Medicaid. On a side note, I accept Medicaid, but I can't afford to see Medicaid patients because we would have to change the entire structure of our agency. We would have to see so many patients even to be profitable that it's too difficult to do. So we see people pro bono. We don't charge them because we can't afford to take Medicaid. So there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed with our mental health care system, and it is, I would say, a good portion of it is violence prevention, violence against yourself. Suicide is one of the biggest concerns that we have right now. Mass shootings are not as common, but they're more widely covered. And controlling the donations to go into things like mental health care and supporting families, for years, or people that are injured, that have injuries for the rest of their lives.
Right, thanks. You guys still stay in touch with some of those kids?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we just felt it was a huge responsibility. As you know, you were at the hospital that afternoon with us, the afternoon that Claire was shot. And there were just, 40, 50 kids every single day at the hospital. And, we had a huge responsibility to those children. They were looking at us, everyone was looking at us for direction and, were we going to take the path of forgiveness and start the healing, or, where were we going to go with this? And for us, it was a huge responsibility because there were so many eyes on us, and they were young eyes, and we needed to give them a path for healing, to start the healing. But to just listening to you, today is just as hard as it was 5.5 years ago. And in some ways harder for us, and particularly me, I'll speak for myself, because now I'm more in a reflective mode than I was when we were in the acute mode, because we did so much legislative work. We had so many kids looking at us, calling us, talking to us, wanting me to meet with them, which I met with every kid that ever called me. Everyone got a letter handwritten from us. It was just that important that they heard, they knew that we heard their voice, their pain when they wrote us. And but now it's actually harder because it's quieted down, and that those quiet moments make me be very reflective of our lives with Claire, and it's hard, as you can hear. It's still hard.
And schools, the school district that we're in has has tried to put some programs in place. They've started doing a culture survey to try to get a pulse on the school and see what are parents thinking and kids thinking. And they've tried to put some programs in place to help students. And it's tough for them. It's something they haven't traditionally had to do. They don't know how to do it. They don't have funding to do it. They don't know resources. They don't know where to send kids that have trouble. And it's not a, historically schools haven't had to do it, but unfortunately it's time. Schools are gonna have to do it. There's troubled kids in our schools and nobody knows about it. The teachers and administrators are the first line. They're going to see that and they need support and help and funding and programs to know what to do. They don't know what to do. But it's quite rampant. Suicide is like at epic dimensions.
Depression is a national epidemic.
Yeah. So there's stigma around mental illness or people going to a counselor for help. And that's part of the culture has to change in schools for young people to know it's okay, you're having a problem, you know, don't take it out on yourself, don't hurt other people, go get help. But if they go to a school counselor that doesn't know what to do, then it stalls out. So it's something new. It's gonna take some creative problem solving and some funding and kind of a new role for maybe schools that they don't want to do, but they need to do.
One of the things that I took away a year and a half ago, I was in a discussion about the future of education. And we spend so much resources on training a teacher. In other words, they go through multiple years of pedagogy and learning how to teach this thing. And it's all about, such a large part of it is about teaching kids how to memorize things and then regurgitate to remember. That's just a huge part of teaching. And what a different world we'd have if we took the teachers who so often are naturally empathetic, are the people that want to help and give of themselves and allowed them training and skills to around some of the issues of mental health and around some of the other things that kids need to learn that in the present, you know, the hectic life people have, they're not getting the access to that information or those life skills. And I think you guys are exactly right that they are our front line.
They're a front line.
I know that what you're saying is true because I have it from the words of my clients. Many of them, in fact, the majority of them are court-ordered to come to mental health therapy. They never would have sought services if the courts didn't say, you have to go. And the amount of relief that many of them express from going through therapy, and a lot of them have said, my goodness, if I knew this stuff in high school, my whole life would have been different. Some of the anger management, the relationship skills, mental health, spotting the signs of just not feeling okay. And it took a court of law to put them in my office, and so many of them express relief from that. And
does the court pay for that?
no, they do. And they have a criminal record, so trying to find employment and pay me for their services, many of them are homeless, that's a whole other issue, but I know how important knowing this stuff in high school, how important the crisis line is. I had a group one night where a guy said that he was depressed and he just didn't think that he was going to make it through the weekend. And he sent me a text message and said, I just don't know what to do. And I said, well, here's the crisis line information for Colorado. And I had to specifically say, he said, it's not a suicide hotline, is it? And I said, no, it's a crisis line. And he said, oh, okay. I didn't think that he would call it. The next week, in group, one of the people said, man, I just haven't been feeling that good this week. And the guy said, you should call that crisis line, it's pretty good. He called it, and after he said that, 3 other men said, yeah, when I called him, I was able to talk to somebody right away, and one of them said, I texted with them. Imagine that, you can text them. And so we know, I mean, that is proof. I have proof that these things work. We just have to expand upon them and make them more important in our society.
Yeah.
Value with value.
Yeah, value, definitely.
Yeah. that was the first thing we did after the Aurora shooting, was just to say, all right, before we talk anything about universal background checks, we're going to put $30 million a year and get regional centers and a crisis hotline and make sure that those. But even with all of it, we're not doing enough, right?
Yeah,
That's the.
we can say we offer those services in the community. The next step is, how do you get, in the case of the flag, for example, some people saying, well, that goes too far, you should intervene. We're going to increase our mental health services. How do you know that the shooter in Copper Canyon and Highlands Ranch would have gone for that service? How do you, that again goes to the stigma, and how do you work with people to access it?
Before they cause harm to somebody in the community. I think the other thing is that we have a crisis service. People can call it and they can be talked off the ledge, but nobody gives them a path to get back home. Like, great, you're not, now you feel like you're managed for the moment, but there are very few services, affordable services, long-term. So yeah, this is great. We have a crisis line and people are accessing it. But when you say, where can I go for long-term therapy, there really aren't that many places. In fact, for an emergency psychiatric evaluation, you're looking at months. That's if it's an emergency. So unless you go to an emergency room and you are actively in crisis, there's no help. There's no help. I feel like this went from hopeful to dreadful.
No.
Yeah, we all had this blank look like,
This is great.
yeah.
Everything's getting better.
How do we
Okay.
overcome this?
No, but it's a challenge. When I was in school, in college, they were just beginning to deinstitutionalize mental health. At that time in Middletown, Connecticut, there was a thing called CVMH, Connecticut Valley Mental Hospital. Huge, awful, just a very, very grim place where people were locked away. And many of them weren't. There's a whole spectrum of mental health issues, and we'd gone too far. And so they closed down Connecticut Valley, and we met, what's his name? Paul Mortensen. He was the son of a veteran who'd had emotional issues, and Paul was addictive and drank and did drugs and didn't finish 7th grade. He just had all these challenges. But there were 4 or 5 of us that kind of adopted him. And so if we needed to paint a room or anything like that, we'd hire him and we'd always kind of check in. And in those days, right when they first made that switch, I think there was a greater activity within the community to reach out to people that were struggling and having a hard time and make sure that they found some work. Now, in a funny way, we sort of shirk that responsibility a little bit.
I think it's because it's really hard to face. It's really hard to admit, especially if you see somebody suffering. We innately want to help them. It's human nature to want to help them. We don't know how to help them. We don't have the resources to help them, so people naturally just turn away from it because as human beings, we avoid pain. And the pain of seeing somebody in pain and not knowing how to help them is too overwhelming for a lot of people. And when they did start deinstitutionalizing mental health, part of it was because they came out with psychotropic medication. So they were able to medicate, send people home to their families, but that wasn't to solve all in itself because the stigma was there that you could potentially be walked into an institution or medicated in a way that you were not happy with. And I think that there's a lot of education that could happen around mental health medications, destigmatizing that, destigmatizing therapy. And I think the younger generation is more on board with mental health. I've had kids openly say, oh yeah, I've been in therapy since I was 5, and I'm like, oh thank goodness honey, you needed that, not in a bad way, but I'm just so grateful that people are actually seeking services for their children. So we've got a lot of work to do, but there are ways that we can expand in our schools, in our hospitals, and in everybody's homes, knowing the right things to ask and who to contact. And right now we just don't have all the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, it just seems like it's a big step. The public, I don't think has reached it because, just like the blank reaction we had when sounds kind of depressing. I think the public is a little bit the same way. I think that we did go too far when we institutionalized, and there was a reason to tear that down. But now, after so many years, and we have so many homeless people and so many people in our jail system, you know, they're not getting treatment. And then when we have shootings that involve people who are mentally disturbed, you know, so often the reaction is, oh, it's not guns, it's mental health. Okay, but then you say to that person, okay, and so what shall we do? You will usually get the same, like, look, they don't know. Well, we have to have more mental health services. What do you mean by that? How? How much will it cost? How do you do it? Are we going to go back to institutionalization? What will it be?
Well, we have jails.
We have jails.
We have
Yeah,
jails.
that's
We
the
are
new
we are
institution.
institutionalizing
Well, we don't use it,
people.
not in Colorado anymore.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
hard to say.
Yeah. It's tough.
It is tough. It's not an easy solution. They got to be doing something. I don't think the public really has that. It's still in that. I think we're still in that stage of, well, we have to do something. It's that mental health thing. But it's the people, the professionals who are doing something,
We're dying
and
out
the
here.
rest of us have to get
Yeah.
on board.
Yeah, it's a multi-systemic problem. And trying to find providers that, making education more affordable for people in the field. Giving some of the things that we afford teachers. Most of the supplies I buy are out of my own pocket. My education costs me over $100,000 a year, and I make less than most people that work in retail. So, it's really hard to sell that to people that don't have a passion for helping people. And then if you add to that people that have committed violence in our society, it's really hard to find people that can be dedicated to that level and still feed their own families, let alone afford therapy for their own trauma that they're going to experience based on the job that they have. So we have a lot of work to do, but there are people out there trying, and I'm really proud of all of my colleagues and everybody that's in this fight.
What about professionals? I mean, the people getting into this field, I know that in certain medical fields, they're having shortages.
We have a shortage.
You have a shortage too?
Yeah, I ran an ad to expand our practice for 6 months, and I had 2 people apply. And they were not qualified.
I have a niece. I can send
Please,
her.
please.
I think too, one of the groups that's maybe not being reached is parents too. Parents that have kids that have problems and the parents don't know what to do. Either, maybe the kid's having a drug problem and the parents don't know where to go, or the kid's having an anger management problem and the parents don't know where to go, they don't have resources. So, it's not, I was talking about schools earlier, it's not always the school. I mean, really the first line, I guess, is the parents, but parents are not equipped well either. So either they don't have insurance to cover counseling, so maybe that's information more than anything, or availability of resources, but kids are suffering because their parents don't know how to guide them or help them.
And look at the dilemma we face, though. We're all complaining about the cost of health care.
Yeah.
We can say we want more coverage in our policies, but let's face it, it comes at a cost.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to require insurance companies to cover more mental health services, we're going to pay more. We don't want to pay more.
I've actually told people that say, well, it can't be that bad. I said, okay, I'm going to challenge you. Challenge of the day, I want you to find a therapist that can see you by Monday for under $150 an hour. Not one has been able to find that. Everybody says, well, I can't get you in. You'll have to go to the emergency room. They go to the emergency room, and the second that they say they're not a danger to themselves or others, they're released to their families. Families don't know what to do. They don't have any support. And a lot of families just hope that they commit a crime, because at least if they commit a crime, they get help. I have people that have said, you know what, I am so glad that I ended up in court-ordered therapy. That should not be the society that we want to live in, where the only saving grace is our criminal justice system.
Governor, I represent Aurora Mental Health, Debbie Stafford, and one of the things that we did after the theater shooting, we've established Connect to Care clinics where people literally can walk in, no appointment and no money, and they could be seen immediately, assessed, and then they can be connected to resources. And so that is one option. But one of the things in my time here in the legislature, we have standards for anger management, for domestic violence for those 18 and over. We have had ongoing struggles about what do we do about juveniles and how do we help angry kids. My first year in the legislature, I carried just a resolution, not even a bill, a resolution that said, let's teach anger management once in middle school and repeat it once in high school. And I was shot down, said you cannot tell public schools to do anything else. But I treat offenders of domestic violence. I've done it for 28 years. And in that work, every client I've ever worked with says, had I learned this when I was younger, because if you're not learning the skills at home, or they have chemical things or other behavioral issues going on, if they're not learning the skills younger, they don't have the tools. They're not using the correct tools. I still believe, put it in a health education class, teach the anger management skill, middle school, repeat it in high school, and at least give more tools for our young people. Right. But one of the things we also find out is the funding for our community mental health center staff is capped by state budget. And so what we're finding, and we have over 540 employees at Aurora Mental Health Center, but what we are finding is hospitals and other healthcare systems can pay more money than we can pay to a salaried individual. And so right now we have a bill coming through the legislature just trying to say to the state, please lift the cap so that we can retain solid professionals. So it is an ongoing challenge, but I think we could partner more effectively with education to help our kids.
I actually had a men's domestic violence offender group and an anger management group that had, they said, if we come up with a curriculum, can you take it to the school? And I just jokingly said, okay. They actually came up the next week with all of the tools that they thought would be the most helpful to know in high school and said, okay, now go do it. And I called Jefferson County because, well, my dad was murdered at Columbine. I figured, I'd just call them up and say, hey, can I do this? And they said, well, we could let you into the health education class, but we can't afford to pay you. We can't provide any materials, and you're going to have to do it whenever we have an opening. And as a professional who's trying to help numerous people that owns a mental health agency, I actually have a location in Aurora, and we work with you, and we enjoy that. But I couldn't do that. I mean, we can't do that. And if we want qualified professionals, we have to make it an option for people and appealing to them and something that is sustainable, because it is hard.
Well, I can tell you 20 years down the road from Columbine, and as I know you've seen this in your practice, I've worked with people who've ended up being court ordered who were either survivors at Columbine or their family members who still are not coping well and using destructive or negative coping skill sets. And we see this with the theater shooting. I think one of the things we learned was to try to get help in as quickly as possible and offer that ongoing support. We're seeing some really positives, but I still think looking for fringed people in our society with limited support system, more antisocial type behaviors, and us collectively trying to come together to be supportive is one helpful way, and it's continual education and information and overcoming stigma.
Absolutely.
So I actually have a psych eval I have to do at 1:30. So
Well, I appreciate you all
I've got
coming.
like 5 minutes.
Did you want to say anything?
No,
about it?
no, thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, Moms Demand Action, of course, is very concerned about all of the gun violence, and so we just wanted to come and support everyone.
Well, I want to thank you for convening this discussion. This is something I've been working on for 20 years, since I met Tom Mauser on the steps of the Capitol 10 days after the shootings at Columbine happened. I've had a chance to work with people. I haven't never had a chance to meet the Davises in person, but it was really special to meet you. What I thought was the most valuable thing, as somebody who was not on the front lines as a survivor, but just one step away, is that discussion of this impacts the community in various ways and ripple effects. And I always say the ripples, the 180 degrees are behind you. You can't even see what's going on, but it is affecting people. So it's a national issue, it's a local issue, and discussing it openly and talking about trauma and various treatments and what the resources are available is a very important discussion this time to mark this anniversary, so thank you for doing that.
But it's funny that in that first 4 years I was governor, it's just somehow the stars got aligned so poorly. But I went to, I think, over 32 funerals and 33 or 34 funerals from kids coming back from Afghanistan, or not coming back from Afghanistan or Iraq, but the wildfires and the floods and the shootings, and so much of that period of time, I was with people going through the worst moments of their lives, and you see these when you guys got up and formally apologized or forgave the Pierce family. I mean, that was one of the most amazing things I think I've ever felt or witnessed in my life. And it meant so much to those kids and so much to the family, obviously. But anyway, that it was just a period of time where things seemed to continue to happen for no explicable reason that were creating such trauma. And it's funny, as we were preparing and talking about doing this event, that and this was really when I was in Charleston, realized that there should have been more resources coming at the moment for each of those individuals, those families, those groups.
Especially I think we need to tap into the fact that people, more in the mass shootings, are willing to help out. It's how do we channel that? Can't always be government. We can't always just do a big increase in the budget to a mental health agency. But people are willing to give from their hearts. And part of that, I think, the education is this is one of the needs that we have.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, it's been 20 years since Columbine, and we haven't completely figured it out, but we have come a long way, and maybe it's time to start putting into funding and resources the things we have learned and begin to, accelerate progress.
And if we teach our children, especially about this issue more,
Absolutely.
Look how they're leading the way after Parkland. Look how on the whole gay marriage and other gay issues, they've come forward and said, we're going to change this. They can change this too.
Absolutely.
Because all life matters, including Carl Pearson, who killed Claire. His life mattered. And I think it's going to take the charge of the young people to move this forward in our society, because they don't want to live in a violent society, and they want to be mentally stable. And they want their friends and family to be doing well. But all life matters.
Right. Pearson, for some I thought it
Carl
was
Pearson. And we say his name because he was a person and he did matter. And it shouldn't have been Claire at the last moment trying to save him. And she did. She tried.
Right. And she saved others.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
No, of course.
Can I get a picture with you before I go?
Have you looked at my face?
Have you
You
looked
sure?
at my face? I cut off half my makeup.
My favorite Abraham Lincoln, one of my favorite Abraham Lincoln quotes is when they would accuse him of being deceitful. They said, Mr. Lincoln, you are too thick. He said, that's possible.